What if the world's most powerful alliance is already dead, and we just haven't been told? Look closely. Right now, a chill is running through the halls of power across Europe. Not from some new threat on their borders, not from an economic crash, but from an almost unbelievable statement made thousands of miles away. A statement that, on the surface, sounded like a relief, a de-escalation. But for those who understand the game, it was a siren, screaming that America's worst nightmare just came true. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, a man known for his measured words, just publicly welcomed a bizarre, yet profoundly significant, assurance from a former, and potentially future, American president. He welcomed the vow not to use military force over Greenland. Let that sink in. Not about Ukraine. Not about Taiwan. Not about the simmering tensions in the Middle East. But Greenland. A cold, remote island in the North Atlantic. Why would a German leader express public relief over something so seemingly absurd? Because it's not about the ice. It's about what that absurd claim represents. It's about the shocking transactional mindset that could once again seize the White House. It's about a future where America doesn't just retreat from global leadership, but actively dismantles the very foundations of the international order it built. Merz followed up this chilling welcome with an urgent, almost desperate plea. He said, and I quote, "Europe must strengthen its unity and competitiveness to counter." To counter what? He didn't finish the sentence, but everyone in the room knew. He was speaking about countering a world where Europe is left naked and alone, facing down a resurgent East, an unstable Middle East, and a domestic agenda that views allies as liabilities, not partners. This isn't a theory. It's a preview. A future where the unshakable bedrock of global security, the transatlantic alliance, cracks wide open. This isn't just about politics. This is about your future, your job, your safety. Because when the world's most vital partnerships crumble, the tremors are felt everywhere. Most people are completely blind to the scale of what's coming. And by the time they realize it, it will be too late to prepare. What if the very foundations of global security, the pillars we've leaned on for generations, are not just cracking, but crumbling before our eyes? Can an alliance survive when its strongest member starts asking, "What's in it for me?" Let's be brutally honest. For nearly 80 years, the global security architecture has rested on one undeniable truth: America would always be there. From the ashes of World War II, the United States didn't just rebuild Europe, it became its shield. NATO wasn't just an alliance, it was a sacred vow. Article 5. An attack on one is an attack on all, was the unwavering promise that allowed Europe to flourish, to focus on economic integration, while America carried the heavy burden of defense. It was a deal that defined an era, a global compact that delivered unprecedented peace and prosperity to the West. But that era is dying. And the process started long before anyone uttered the words, "America first." Think back to the first time Donald Trump stepped onto the world stage. It wasn't just a political shift, it was a fundamental reevaluation of every single international agreement, every unspoken guarantee. Suddenly, the unspoken truth became a spoken question: are these alliances even worth it? He openly questioned Article 5. He called NATO obsolete. He demanded allies pay up, not as partners in a common cause, but as delinquent tenants paying their rent. For many, this was seen as bluster, a negotiating tactic. For others, particularly in Europe, it was a terrifying glimpse into a future where the protector became the disruptor. They tried to brush it off, to appease, to hope it was a temporary anomaly. They were wrong. And Merz's recent comment isn't just about an island. It's the echo of that terrifying glimpse, becoming an undeniable reality. Remember the context. Trump once mused about buying Greenland. It was dismissed as a bizarre whim. But the recent vow, welcomed by Merz, signals a chilling truth. Trump's past actions and rhetoric about Greenland weren't just about acquiring territory. They represented a transactional, almost real estate developer approach to foreign policy. It's like a landlord telling his tenant, "I could take your backyard, but I choose not to." The tenant breathes a sigh of relief, but the deeper, more unsettling realization is that the landlord thought he had the right to take it in the first place, and that the relationship is no longer one of mutual respect, but of unilateral power. Merz's welcome isn't a celebration. It's a resignation. It's the sound of a continent realizing that the old rules, the old promises, the old sense of security have evaporated. He's saying, thank God he won't invade Greenland, because the alternative, an American leader acting on impulses, ignoring international norms, and destabilizing the very fabric of alliances, is no longer unthinkable. It's simply how things might be. This nightmare isn't a sudden, cataclysmic event. It's the slow, agonizing death of predictable partnership. It's the dawning realization that the most powerful nation in the world might choose to view its allies not as integral parts of a collective defense, but as obstacles to its own perceived self-interest, or worse, as weaklings to be exploited. When the cornerstone of global stability becomes unpredictable, the entire structure shakes. And that shaking, the profound instability it creates, is America's worst nightmare come true. Because it unravels decades of painstaking work to create a safer, more prosperous world. It doesn't just affect Europe, it fundamentally alters the global balance of power, leaving a vacuum that others will eagerly fill. This isn't just a political headache. It's the biggest geopolitical earthquake of our lifetime, and most people are still asleep through the tremors. The nightmare isn't an invasion or a direct attack, but the complete and utter withdrawal of trust and predictable partnership from the United States, forcing its oldest and most loyal allies into an existential crisis of self-reliance, leaving them exposed to a world that suddenly looks far more dangerous. The foundation isn't cracking, it's being deliberately dismantled from within. Can a continent, historically fractured by wars and internal rivalries, truly unite in the face of an existential threat, or will this awakening to a self-reliant future only lead to deeper, more dangerous divisions? For decades, Europe had a comfortable arrangement. It delegated its hardest, most expensive problem, defense, to Washington. This wasn't by accident. After two devastating world wars, the priority was economic integration, social welfare, and preventing another internal conflict. The U.S., with its vast military and global reach, filled the security void. It allowed Europe to become an economic powerhouse, a diplomatic soft power giant, without having to bear the full cost and responsibility of hard power projection. But that comfort, that luxury, is now a liability. Merz's call for unity and competitiveness isn't new. For years, European leaders like Emmanuel Macron have warned about Europe's strategic autonomy, going as far as to describe NATO as brain dead back in 2019. These weren't idle musings. They were stark warnings that Europe needed to grow up, to build its own muscular foreign and defense policy, because the American parent might just pack its bags and leave. Then came the starkest wake-up call imaginable: Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Suddenly, the specter of conventional warfare returned to Europe's doorstep. Nations that had cut defense spending for decades scrambled to rearm. Germany, a country famously allergic to military spending, announced a massive €100 billion special fund for its armed forces. Tanks, artillery, air defense, the forgotten instruments of war were back on the agenda. But even with Ukraine, a critical difference remained. The initial and most powerful response came from the United States. Its military aid, intelligence sharing, and diplomatic leadership were crucial. Without it, Ukraine's defense would have been far more precarious. European nations responded, but the scale and speed of their collective action still lagged behind. Now, imagine that vital American leadership gone. Imagine a world where the White House is either indifferent to Europe's struggles or, worse, actively hostile to the idea of supporting them. That's the nightmare scenario Merz is preparing for. He's looking at a future where Europe has to do it all: deter Russia, manage instability in its own neighborhood, protect its trade routes, and project its values, all without the guarantee of American backing. The problem? Europe isn't a single nation. It's a patchwork of 27 sovereign states, each with its own history, its own strategic interests, its own defense industries, and often, its own lingering nationalistic tendencies. Building a truly unified European defense force isn't just about money. It's about political will, command structures, standardized equipment, and overcoming deep-seated national rivalries. Think of the arguments over common procurement. One country wants French jets, another German tanks, a third Italian naval vessels. How do you forge a cohesive force from such disparate parts? This isn't a theoretical exercise. It's a race against time. Because while Europe debates, others are watching, calculating. Putin watches. China watches. They see a potential vacuum, an opportunity to test the resolve of a fragmented continent. Merz's call for unity and competitiveness is a desperate attempt to rally the troops before the storm hits. It's an admission that Europe cannot afford to rely on hope or on the shifting whims of American politics. The choice is stark: forge a truly independent defense and foreign policy identity, capable of standing on its own, or risk becoming geopolitical pawns in a new multipolar world, vulnerable to the ambitions of great powers with far less benevolent intentions. This isn't just about survival. It's about defining Europe's place in a world where its most powerful patron has decided to step away. And the clock is ticking faster than anyone realizes. The answer reveals that Europe is at its most critical juncture since World War II. It must either accelerate its path towards a true, unified strategic autonomy, a common defense, a cohesive foreign policy, and economic muscle, or face the devastating consequences of fragmentation, leaving it exposed and vulnerable to a rising tide of global instability. The struggle isn't just external, it's an internal battle for its very soul. If the U.S. steps back from its global role and Europe scrambles to find its footing, what happens to the fragile balance of power in every other corner of the world, and how will those tremors reach your backyard? For nearly a century, the United States, for all its flaws, has been the anchor of the global system. Its Navy patrolled critical sea lanes, guaranteeing free trade. Its diplomatic corps mediated conflicts. Its economic might underpinned international institutions. When America acted as a global policeman, an uneasy peace, a predictable order, was largely maintained. But what happens when that policeman decides to retire? The answer is simple and terrifying: chaos. Let's look beyond Europe. This region is already a powder keg. China's ambitions are clear: regional hegemony, absorption of Taiwan, and reshaping the global order in its image. For decades, the U.S. presence, its naval fleets, its alliances with Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines, has been the primary deterrent to outright Chinese aggression. But imagine a scenario where the U.S., under an America First doctrine, signals a profound reluctance to intervene in distant conflicts. What message does that send to Beijing? It screams opportunity. The window for China to act on Taiwan, to solidify its claims in the South China Sea, or to aggressively expand its influence across Asia, swings wide open. This isn't just a regional squabble. It's the potential for a conflict that would dwarf Ukraine in its economic and human cost, disrupting global supply chains and potentially igniting a nuclear flashpoint. The Middle East, a region perpetually on the brink. For decades, the U.S. has played a complex, often controversial, but undeniably stabilizing role, or at least, a role that contained outright regional wars. Its withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal, while significant, was a taste of what full disengagement could look like. If America further reduces its military footprint, abandons its traditional allies, or signals a lack of interest in mediating disputes, what happens? Iran becomes emboldened, perhaps accelerating its nuclear program. Regional powers like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Israel, no longer confident in U.S. backing, could adopt far more aggressive, unilateral actions, leading to a new arms race and escalating proxy conflicts that could easily spill over. The energy markets, already volatile, would become a permanent source of global anxiety. Africa and Latin America, these continents, often seen as secondary concerns, would also feel the seismic shift. Without consistent American engagement, other powers step in. China has already made massive inroads with its Belt and Road Initiative, trading infrastructure for influence and resources. Russia offers military support and disinformation. A U.S. retrenchment would accelerate this trend, leading to a scramble for resources, heightened political instability, and potentially a new colonial-style competition among great powers, with little regard for democratic values or human rights. The nightmare isn't just about America's domestic politics, it's about the global system it helped create collapsing under its own weight, abandoned by its architect. This isn't just a theoretical problem for diplomats and generals. It's a problem for every single person on this planet. Because when global stability erodes, when the rules-based order gives way to a might makes right mentality, the consequences trickle down. Trade routes become insecure, leading to higher prices. Regional conflicts create refugee crises that strain global resources. New powers, unconstrained by established norms, emerge, potentially rewriting the rules of the game in ways that are far less favorable to democracy, freedom, and prosperity. The illusion of an unchanging world, upheld by American power, is shattering. And what emerges from the wreckage will be a far more dangerous, unpredictable, and ultimately less prosperous world for everyone. Most people have no idea how profoundly their lives are intertwined with this fragile global balance, and how quickly it can unravel. The dominoes are already falling, piece by piece. The absence of a clear, consistent global leader precipitates a dangerous era of localized power struggles, emboldened revisionist states, and the rapid rise of new, potentially less stable, global hegemonies. The world order is not simply shifting, it is fracturing, paving the way for unprecedented instability and conflict that will touch every life, everywhere, beyond the battlefields and geopolitical maps. How will this seismic shift fundamentally rewire the global economy, impacting your job, your savings, your standard of living, and every financial decision you make? Economic stability isn't a given, it's a consequence of political stability. For decades, the global economy has thrived on the predictable currents of free trade, stable alliances, and a U.S. dollar that reigns supreme. But when the geopolitical plates start to grind against each other, the economic tremors are immediate, devastating, and far-reaching. Merz's plea for European competitiveness isn't just about defense, it's a stark recognition of the looming economic winter. Let's break down the economic fallout of America's retreat and Europe's desperate scramble. America first means prioritizing domestic industries above all else, often through tariffs and trade barriers. While some argue this protects local jobs, the historical reality is that trade wars hurt everyone. They raise prices for consumers, stifle innovation, and force companies to reevaluate complex global supply chains that have been painstakingly built over decades. If the U.S. starts imposing tariffs on its allies or demanding protectionist measures, Europe will likely retaliate, leading to a spiral that shrinks global trade, makes goods more expensive, and reduces overall economic growth. Your favorite products from abroad will become luxuries, if they're available at all. The COVID-19 pandemic offered a terrifying preview of what happens when global supply chains break down. Factories shut down, ports bottleneck, and essential goods become scarce. A fragmented geopolitical landscape, marked by trade disputes, regional conflicts, and a push for friendshoring, only trading with politically aligned nations, would make these disruptions a permanent feature, not an anomaly. Companies would face immense pressure to reshore production, leading to higher manufacturing costs that are passed directly to you. Critical components for your cars, electronics, and even medicines could face chronic shortages. For decades, the US dollar has been the world's reserve currency, the bedrock of international finance. Oil is priced in dollars. Most international transactions happen in dollars. This gives the US immense economic power. But a transactional, unpredictable US foreign policy, one that weaponizes sanctions and alienates allies, pushes other nations to seek alternatives. Countries like China and Russia are actively promoting their own currencies and building alternative financial systems. If the dollar's dominance erodes, even slightly, it could lead to significant currency volatility, making international trade more complex and expensive. For average Americans, it could mean higher inflation and a reduction in purchasing power, as the value of the dollar relative to other currencies declines. Global uncertainty is kryptonite for investment. Businesses and investors shy away from putting capital into regions or projects where political risks are high. If the world is perceived as more unstable, if alliances are weak, and if the threat of conflict looms larger, capital will retreat, impacting innovation, job creation, and economic expansion worldwide. Companies that rely on international collaboration for research and development, or for accessing diverse talent pools, will find their operations hampered. Merz's call for competitiveness also implies Europe bearing a much heavier defense burden. Shifting billions from social programs, infrastructure, or education to military spending has a direct economic cost. While it creates jobs in the defense sector, it often comes at the expense of other, more growth-oriented investments. It's a necessary evil in a dangerous world, but it's still a drain on national budgets and ultimately on taxpayer pockets. This isn't just about some distant abstract economic theory. This is about the prices you pay at the grocery store, the availability of goods in your local shops, the stability of your investments, and the security of your job. When the global economic system, built on the premise of stable alliances and predictable rules, starts to crack, everyone, everywhere, pays the price. The nightmare isn't just geopolitical, it's deeply, profoundly economic. And for most people, the true cost of this unfolding disaster remains hidden, waiting to hit them where it hurts the most, their wallets and their livelihoods. The economic consequence is a fundamental rewiring of global prosperity. Economic security becomes inextricably linked to geopolitical independence, driving a new era of protectionism, supply chain instability, and currency volatility. This will lead to widespread inflation, job insecurity, and a significant decline in global living standards, marking the end of an era of interconnected growth. What we've laid out isn't a prediction of doom. It's an analysis of undeniable shifts. The signals are screaming. The German Chancellor, a man acutely aware of European history and its vulnerability, isn't just making a casual remark about Greenland. He's issuing a profound warning. Prepare for a world where the US is no longer the predictable, unwavering ally. He's telling Europe to grow up, to arm itself, and to unite, because the alternative is to be prey in a rapidly darkening world. America's nightmare has come true not in a single, explosive event, but in the slow, agonizing death of its own carefully constructed global order. It's a nightmare born of indifference, transactionalism, and a turning inward that leaves a gaping power vacuum. And this vacuum won't remain empty. Others will rush in to fill it, not with the benevolent intentions of the past, but with their own agendas, their own rules, and their own vision for a new world order. This isn't a problem that will fix itself. This isn't a political cycle that will eventually swing back. The choice is made now. The path Europe is forced to embark on, the global realignments that are already underway, these are permanent. They will reshape our economies, our safety, and our children's futures for generations to come. Most people have no idea what's about to happen because they're not listening to the whispers from Berlin, the desperate calls for unity, or the silence from Washington. But the world is changing, and it's changing faster than you can imagine. But the question remains, if Europe does manage to unite, if it truly builds its own independent defense and projects its own power, what kind of superpower will it become? And how will that new, formidable force challenge the very nations that created this vacuum in the first place? To dive deeper into the potential rise of a unified European military and its implications for global power, exploring the specifics of their secret plans and the hurdles they still face, make sure to subscribe and hype this channel.